Hello, this is Brett Ethridge, founder of Dominate the GMAT, here with an important GMAT tip for you, and specifically one having to do with time management. Time management, of course, is one of the most crucial aspects of you getting a high score on the GMAT. A lot of times students have a whole lot of knowledge up here. You might be able to work really hard GMAT questions and get them right, but the question is, can you do it under the time constraints on the GMAT? And so we need to learn how to be a little bit more effective and efficient with our time. And I'd like to talk about the trade-off, as you're taking the GMAT, between time and accuracy, right? And there's this trade-off where sometimes we're willing to sacrifice time for accuracy. And when's the only time we would be willing to sacrifice accuracy? To save a little bit of time. And time's the most valuable asset you have on the GMAT. In fact, on the quantitative section, for example, where you have 37 questions in 75 minutes, as you know, that works out to about 2 minutes per question, right? So when might we spend a little bit more time on a question? When might we sacrifice a little bit of time? Let me explain something that you might not know, you might not even think about. Did you know that you can still get an 800 on the GMAT with getting a couple of questions wrong? Absolutely. And hardly anybody even gets an 800. And so even if you're shooting for Harvard or Stanford and you want to get up into this upper 700s, you're still likely to get some questions wrong. Now, why do I explain this to you? Because I want you to adopt the mindset that it is okay, especially on the harder questions, to get them wrong. In fact, if you think about the way the GMAT is scored, right, and check out my other videos for GMAT scoring, the earlier questions have a lot more variance in terms of the score, and the later questions don't vary by as much, right? If here's your score between 200 and 800. And what that means is, by the time you get to some of the harder questions anyway, as your score goes up, they're technically not quote-unquote worth as many points. And here's my point with this. One of the techniques, or one of the strategies that you can learn to adopt from a time management standpoint is the understanding that when you see a really hard question and you're not immediately sure how to proceed, there comes a moment where you can make the following decision. I may literally cut my losses on this question, guess, to save myself time for the next question. Does that make sense? For example, let's say we get to a really hard question, right? Here's the question we're looking at on the screen. One of a couple things that could happen. You could look at that question and you could spend a whole lot of time, like maybe 3 minutes or 4 minutes. Or some students literally will spend 5 minutes trying to get that question right. And one of two things is going to happen. You might get it right and your score will go up a little bit. Does that make sense? Your score will go up if you get that question right. But what have you sacrificed? You've sacrificed time, right? Let's say, for example, we overspent time to the tune of 2 minutes. Well, what we've done now is we have 2 minutes less time to spend on the rest of the questions. And what do you think is going to sacrifice later on? Accuracy. What if instead you take a look at the question, you spend about 15 seconds, you're thinking through, and you just kind of say, you know what, I could probably spend the next 5 minutes on this question if I were alone at home and maybe get it right, but here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to cut my losses. After 15 seconds, I'm literally going to make the best educated guess I can, and I'm going to save a minute 45. That's valuable. Now here's what happens. You're probably going to get the question wrong. Your score will go down, but what happens? You now have a minute 45 more time to spend on the next question, or spread out over all future questions. Now watch this. Time, that extra time, may lead to more accuracy, i.e. a higher likelihood that you'll get the next question or 2 or 3 correct because you have more time that you're playing with. And watch what happens. You get that next question correct, your score goes right back up. Does that make sense? Whereas let's say you spend all this time, you lose 2 minutes, you get it right, but now you have a 2-minute deficit. You scramble, you panic, you're freaked out. It's a harder question now, by the way, anyway. Do you think you're more or less likely to get that question right? probably less likely to get that question right. You get it wrong, your score goes down, you kind of end up in the same place. And who's really better off? The student who not only has a little bit more time, but also more peace of mind, or the student who is now panicked, who is frantic, who may be rushing at this point. Maybe this student's more likely to get the next question right, and this student's more likely to get the next question wrong. Here's my point. I'm not telling you to do this a lot. I mean, you don't want to just guess on a whole bunch of questions, but I do want you to understand, from a time management standpoint, there is value in saving time on the test. And there is a time and place, especially on harder questions, especially later in a section, to sacrifice a little bit of accuracy for time that will actually help your score in the long run. And it's something you can practice on your practice test. Get in the habit of get in the practice of maybe immediately identifying, this question, I could spend the next 5 minutes on this question. I don't even know at that point if I'm going to get it right, but it's certainly not worth spending that much time. I'm just going to cut my losses now. Make the best educated guess I can, eliminate some clearly wrong answers, but maybe make the best guess, save myself that time for later in the section. If you think through this type of thing, I hope this makes sense. I think you'll see that in the long run, what you want to do is set yourself up for the highest possibility of likelihood over the course of the entire section. Now, this is an advanced time management technique. I don't want you to go home and say, Brett said I can just guess on a whole bunch of questions and get a higher score. What I am saying is understand, as you're thinking about time management, this trade-off between time and accuracy. And sometimes you're going to need to decide when it makes sense to be a little bit more accurate. For example, earlier in the section, definitely you can spend a little bit more time, more than your 2 minutes per question, earlier on the section because it's so important. And again, go look on YouTube for my videos about GMAT scoring. So there's a time and place for that, but there's also a time and place for saving time, your most precious asset, really, that you have on the GMAT. So go out, practice it, master these time management types of techniques. It'll jack your score up, it'll better equip you to get into the 700s, and it'll certainly put you in a better position to dominate the GMAT.